We now cross over to our Oh Soo-young for Global Insight for an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It's now time for Global Insight, where we connect with people around the world on issues making headlines. Well, business has been booming for IT giant Samsung Electronics in recent months. Having overtaken Intel as the largest chipmaker, Samsung expects to record its biggest ever quarterly sales in its Q3 figures, also marking the biggest quarterly profit seen since 2018. And this is mostly thanks to its strong sales of memory chips amid strong global demand. Now, new Galaxy foldable and flippable phones, they've also sold like hotcakes after their release in late August. But the question is, will the company continue to streak ahead? A new global digital tax on large conglomerates, companies, and falling demand for memory chips might mean that there are bumps ahead for South Korea's largest company. We discussed these challenges with Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea, and Ricky Villacrez, US Editor of GSM Arena. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us today. And well, let's get started with this global tax, Professor Yang. Now, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, South Korea's largest two chip makers, they're expected to be subject to Pillar 1 of the G20's digital tax. So first of all, what does Pillar 1 mean for these two companies?
Okay, well, let's explain what the Pillar 1 is first. If you're a multinational company and your revenues are greater than 20 billion euros, that's about 23 billion US dollars or 27.5 trillion won. And if they work in many different countries, if they earn money from many different countries and they earn more than 1 million euros from a in a foreign country, or 250,000 euros from a relatively small country, and if they earn more than 10% profit, then of that extra profit over 10%, they have to pay 25% of that in taxes. Right now, it seems that Samsung and Hynix are probably the only firms which are going to be affected by the law for now. But while we're calling this a digital tax because the negotiations originally started out dealing with IT companies, right now the negotiations have seemed to have gone further than that, and it may be applicable to more general multinational companies as well, except for financial companies and what they call extraction companies, which are mostly natural resources, especially oil. Other companies which are not particularly related to IT may be affected by this Pillar 1 as well. And in this case, you'll have to pay taxes to many, many different countries, depending on how profitable are your operations in that particular country.
So it looks like there's quite a bit of complications ahead for the South Korean companies. Well, the South Korean government, Professor Yang, has been quite wary of this, the potential impact the global tax might have on the country's largest companies. So how are firms like Samsung Electronics expected to be affected by the tax, and what kind of adjustments do you think they're going to have to make?
Okay, well, they haven't calculated it explicitly yet because it's a very complex calculation. But they have tried to simulate something for Samsung. And on their last quarter, their operating profit was about 36 trillion won. So they figured they'll have to pay about 600 billion won in taxes to different countries. And if Samsung earns, say, $60 trillion of operating profit per year, that would mean about 1.4 trillion won taxes that may be going to other countries. Now, having said that, the total tax bill for Samsung may not change all that much because the government has promised that there will be no double taxation. So if they pay taxes elsewhere, they don't have to pay taxes to Korean government. So it may affect the Korean government more than the company itself. Also, the original impetus for rules like this have to do with what's called transfer pricing. When the multinationals export parts to other countries' subsidiaries, they have certain freedom on how they're going to price those intermediate goods. And a lot of people are arguing that those type of pricing control over how they price intermediate parts abroad can be used for tax evasion. So this may be expanded to include those type of transfer tax problems as well. But remember, right now, they started this negotiations for digital companies, but there's nothing in the rules right now that says that it's applicable only to digital companies. So they may actually expand to include some other very profitable Korean companies.
Now let's bring Ricky Villacrez into the conversation. Mr. Villacrez, Samsung Electronics, it's expected to record its biggest ever quarterly revenue in Q3, and this was largely down to its semiconductor business. So what's led to the boost in demand for memory chips, and what edge does Samsung currently have over other memory chip makers?
Yes, so great question. When the chip shortage began back in late 2019, early 2020, the companies were stuck. So Samsung was able to expand. They have the capital and the capacity to expand their chip foundries, and they are continuing to do these expansions so that they can meet the demand that is still on the slack side. There's still a lot of demand to be met. There's still a lot of capacity to be made for these new chip demand. So Samsung currently, what they have to do now is they need to keep expanding, and they need to expand their foundry business so that they can continue having that edge over companies like Hynix and TSMC.
Mr. Villacrez, from what I understand, there's been something of a global chip shortage. How did this chip shortage start?
Yeah, so of course, great question. So in late 2019, going into 2020, there were all these electronic and consumer companies, and there was all this innovation, and there was a lot of smart appliances, and there's a lot of new smartphones. There's a lot of 5G is coming. So there's a self-driving cars and advancements in medicine. There's so much technology coming, and there was only a handful of companies making these semiconductor chips. And when COVID-19 hit, obviously production had to halt for a long time, and because of this halt, and it caused a shockwave in the entire supply chain that we are still seeing today. And that constraint that's going on in the supply chain right now is what we're still feeling now, and why we're still talking about the shortage, and why we might continue to see this shortage until companies like Samsung and SK Hynix can catch up to demand. And I don't think that this demand is going to slow down anytime soon, especially with the holiday shopping season coming.
Professor Young, some local experts, though, they've been expecting demand to slow down. Do you know why that is?
Well, there has been some speculation that a lot of chip makers were buying the semiconductors to prepare themselves for a possible shortage. So in a sense, they've been stocking up. And because they've been stocking up, they won't need to buy as many semiconductors in the second half of the year. This kind of talk has been around since actually middle of last year. They were always expecting that because the users were stockpiling semiconductors, that the demand would fall in about 3 to 6 months. Now, it's continually been surprising that that is not happening. Now, it does seem that the users are stocking up, but perhaps because demand continues to be strong, that we keep expecting to see semiconductor exports and semiconductor demand fall in about 3 to 6 months. We never see it. So at least for now, it does seem that semiconductor demand will remain strong. The only problem is when you're producing electronics, it's not necessarily only the semiconductors that you need to produce these goods. So there might be some shortages in other parts that restricts production, which in turn affects the demand for semiconductors. But for now, even though the reasons are not entirely clear, you're probably better off betting that the strong demand will continue for the next few months.
And Professor Yang, so with the current strong demand for memory chips and also Samsung's new foldable, flippable phones, of course, as well as their wearables, it looks like the company does have a promising future. But Samsung's stock prices, though, they've been on a downward trend recently. And Goldman Sachs, in fact, they revised the IT giant's target stock price down to 100,000 won per share. And SK Hynix also saw a downward revision. What's the reason for the slump in stock prices?
Okay, well, the most popular reason that's given is that whatever profits we see had already been baked into the stock prices. So what they're calculating now with the lower stock prices is something which is relatively far off into the future. Again, with the possible reduction in the strong demand for semiconductors, I'm not quite sure if I particularly believe in that because they've been saying this for the last 18 months or so, and Samsung has continually beaten estimates of how they will be doing. But it is clear that there seems to be a lot of uncertainty in estimating what the semiconductor demand will be in the next few months to a year. And also, because Samsung concentrates so much on memory chips, the DRAM chips, and DRAM chips, again, depend on production. That depends also on other parts that seems to be not in steady supply right now. There might be bottlenecks for those other parts. The demand for memory chips does seem to be falling a bit in the last few months, and that might be preying on the analysts' estimations.
And Mr. Vellecrest, how long do you expect this global chip shortage to last?
It's a very difficult question to answer because there's many different factors, including how fast can these companies scale, and is the global economy going to continue this demand of electronics and innovations? So, like the professor said, there has been speculation that it would only last a few months, but we're still going through it. And there's been speculation that it would last to the first half of this upcoming year, going into the second half of next year. So it's difficult to predict exactly when we can start seeing more of the demand catching up.
Right, and Professor Yang, given the elasticity of semiconductor prices and supplies, how should Samsung strengthen its revenue stream?
Okay, well, Samsung has been planning to do this for a long time. Memory chips are basically commodity goods. Right now, Korea has a unique position in the global economy where they're perfectly suited to make these memory chips, which are high-tech, but perhaps not really, very, very high-tech. So China is trying to catch up, and Samsung and Hynix need to adjust for that. How they were adjusting for it was to try to get into so-called system chips, where they are going into things like CPUs and graphic chips, program chips which have programs that could be adapted. If you make more of those system chips, and they should give you some more of a monopolistic power, so that prices will be more steadier. You don't have to face as much competition from newcomers in China and elsewhere. If they do make that leap to the system chips, then Samsung should have a much more steady stream of income. But the problem is you need much more human capital. You need many more technicians, and Samsung has been having a hard time moving into that. Another form of possible profit center is foundries, where you physically manufacture chips. But personally, I'm not sure that's a good industry to move into, but it's not really a high margin industry. So I'm not sure if that's going to form a profit center, but Samsung probably want to work with foundries anyway, because it is crucial for their chip production.
Right, and Samsung certainly has been looking to expand its foundry business. And Mr. Vellecrest, what does this really mean for the company?
Yes, so Samsung is just behind TSMC in terms of high-end system on a chips, like the professor was mentioning. For example, in the iPhone's performance with the TSMC-made Apple chips are slightly superior on paper. But Samsung what they need to do now is they need to expand their chip business while also pushing innovations. So what this means for Samsung is they are trying to get chips to be more efficient and smaller so that they can be used in more applications and to solve more of these problems that these chips are being installed in. So it is it's coming with innovations on making them so much smaller so that they can be more powerful and more power efficient.
Right, well, that's all the time we have for the interview today. That was Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at Catholic University of Korea, and Ricky Villacrez, US Editor of GSM Arena. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.